So Kimi K3 was released, and this is interesting news because it ranks #1 on the Arena Web Dev benchmark. This is a web development test that measures how good frontier AI models are at creating websites. It contains many familiar names like Fable, GPT 5.6, GLM, Grok, etc., but it's Kimi that sits in the first place. And the gap is actually significant. If you look at the score difference between GPT 5.6 and Fable 5, it's only about 15 points. But between Fable and Kimi, it's over 40. And if you look at the price per million tokens column, things get even more outrageous. It's more than 3 times cheaper than Fable 5. In fact, to find a cheaper model, you need to go all the way down to Grok 4.5. But why should you even trust this benchmark? Well, it's probably better than anything else you have in mind. And that's because of how Arena comes up with these scores. If you go to their site, you'll be able to pick battle mode, where you enter a query, and then Arena will pick 2 AI models at random to answer it. You'll then be presented with the 2 responses, and you'll be asked to rate which one's best, but you won't know which AI models created them. This leads to a fairer comparison because most benchmarks are open source, and so the AI labs can look at their test cases and tune their AI models to perform really good at these test cases, but not generalize well to other problems. This problem is known as contamination, but it doesn't apply to Arena because here the AI models are shown fresh user prompts that they haven't seen during training. But even so, if we go to artificial analysis, we'll see that Kimi performs really well at the traditional benchmarks as well. And on the right, you also see that it's fairly cheap, especially compared to Fable. One thing I find a little bit funny is that Kimi K3 was released literally a day after Thinking Machines released their open source Inkling model, and Kimi obliterates it. For those who don't know, Thinking Machines is the startup created by OpenAI's ex-CTO, Mira Murati. Some technical details: the model is almost 3 trillion parameters big. We don't know how it compares to GPT and Claude in this aspect, as both of them are closed source and they don't publish their exact parameter count. However, there is some speculation that they're both around the 3 trillion parameter mark. Kimi has a context of 1 million tokens, which is a lot, and it's also natively multimodal, which means that it can understand images and video in addition to text. This is actually a major improvement from their previous version, Kimi 2.7, which couldn't understand either. This might actually explain why this version performs so much better at the web development benchmark, because the previous one wasn't able to understand pictures and thus couldn't take a screenshot of a page and judge it, but the new version can. Lastly, Kimi K3 is already available on their platform, but the weights will only be released in about 10 days from when this video gets released. This is especially important because a lot of people are concerned with sending their data to Kimi as they are a Chinese company. That is understandable, as with a Western company, if they were to, say, mismanage your data, you have a lot of remedies available to you, including taking them to court, but those remedies might not be available if the company is based in China. And actually, the way most people use these models is not directly with their creator. It's with a third-party company like Fireworks that will host the model and then provide it to you on a US or European server. But until the weights are released, this cannot happen, and we're forced to using Kimi through their platform. Once they are released, you will be able to find them here on Hugging Face along with the previous versions of Kimi. Before we go into testing, one thing worth mentioning is that Moonshot AI, the company behind Kimi, has raised over $2 billion to go heads-on against the biggest AI labs. Now, there are a couple of ways to use Kimi. First, you can go to kimi.com and just prompt it like you would ChatGPT, but there is also the option of downloading Kimi Work. And if I open this tab, you'll see that Kimi Work looks very similar to Claude Code or to Codex. And here it is on my desktop. I've decided to use that because it'll allow us to better test the web development capabilities. The app itself is in beta, and if you use it a little bit, you'll see that it's slightly rough around the edges. Like, for example, when I was downloading it, it had a lot of Chinese text that was displayed that I wasn't able to read or understand, even though my computer's language is set to English. Another thing I've noticed that's minor, but a little bit unsettling is that if I go into skills and then I try to preview one, on the right, it'll show me raw markdown. I don't feel this is an appropriate format for a tooltip, but overall, it does work. The first thing I tried to do was send this prompt and I got this error message. Too many people are chatting with Kimi right now. Please try again soon. You can bypass this by just buying a subscription. Then I was able to run the prompt. You can pause the video and read through it, but it basically asks it to create a website for a solar panel company, and it doesn't go into detail in terms of the style that we want. This is intentional because I wanted to test what style Kimi will give us by default. And just like Claude Code or Codex, it's able to think, it's able to write files, and it's able to execute commands. And right at the end, it has created the file. We can click preview on the right, and just like Codex, it'll open an in-app browser where it'll show us the site. And to be honest, when I first saw this, it was really underwhelming. This is basically slop. And there are so many dead giveaways for it. For example, the way it's designed the logo, or the colors that it picked, the blue and yellow combination. There's also the M dashes. And there's this annoying box shadow on this button and on this button. But probably the most revealing fact is this design pattern that's called the eyebrow that actually is repeated throughout the site. There are also a couple of errors, like for example here, this text should have been in front of the infographic, and this text down here is not properly aligned. I gave the exact same prompt to Fable, and let's see what it came up with. And make it full window. And you'll see that it's pretty similar. And the similarities are evident throughout the website, not just on the initial hero section. I'm gonna show Kimi once more just so you can realize how similar their designs are. I think the reason we're seeing this is because the Moonshot team used synthetic data from Fable in order to train Kimi. And in order for me to explain what synthetic data is, let me first tell you how companies like OpenAI and Anthropic get their training data. They actually hire companies like Mercor to outsource this process. If you go on their website, you will see countless of roles like a medical expert, legal expert, physics PhD, and the list goes on and on. And these are well-paid jobs where humans are paid to create training data for AI. If you go on the Mercor AI subreddit, you'll see a couple of posts like this, Mercor changed my life, where this person appears to have made $40,000 in a couple of months by creating training data on Mercor. But as you can imagine, paying experts these kind of rates can get very expensive very quick. And this is actually a big part of where AI spending goes to. So instead, somebody can use synthetic data. If you're trying to train an AI model and you know that another AI model exists that performs better than yours, you can prompt the other AI model that performs better and use its responses to then train your AI model. So basically, your AI model is more or less taught by the other better AI model. In a blog post earlier this year, Anthropic specifically called out Moonshot as well as some other Chinese AI labs for supposedly creating over 24,000 fraudulent accounts in order to create synthetic data from Claude. And if they did that, that might explain why the outputs of Kimi are so similar to the ones of Anthropic. I'm personally not the biggest fan of AI labs doing this because from the perspective of a user, it doesn't make sense for every AI model to output the exact same design. I then prompted it to create a personal finance web app, and I added a little bit more detail in terms of the design that I want. Again, you can pause the video to take a look at the prompt, but you will see that it spinned up an agent that did a couple of things, and then it returned the HTML file. And this is the dashboard. I think the result looks much less sloppy than before, probably because we were more explicit with the style that we wanted. We also have some tabs like the transactions, budgets, and savings goals. We should be able to add a number here, and then the emergency fund updates. We also have a savings simulator, and as I adjust this, we can see that the values on the rows change. There's no apparent change on the slope of the graph, but if I increase something too much, we can see that it started going down as my expenses surpassed my income. And this is the design Claude Code came up with. Even though it's a little bit different, we can see that, for example, the tabs are on the top of the page. It still feels very similar to what Kimi created. Especially as I go to the Goals and Simulator tab, you'll see we have the exact same graph and it has the exact same number of rows. So there are 5 rows here. And if I go to Kimi, you'll see that the graph here also has 5 rows. Even though Kimi hasn't really innovated with its software and there's no features here that you wouldn't find on Codex or on Claude Code, it does have all the features that Codex and Claude Code have, like scheduled tasks, deep research, or Kimi Claw, which is basically an alternative to Claude Dispatch. So this was an exciting model to test. If you're already on ChatGPT or Claude, I don't think it's worth switching over just yet, but we might get an even bigger surprise from the Moonshot AI team in the future that can justify the switching costs. That being said, there's also some risk that they end up in the middle where their models are not fast, cheap, and fine-tunable, and they're also not the best, and this would be detrimental for them. Lastly, if you're looking to implement AI in your business, click the link in the video description and book a call with us.